I hereby call to order this special meeting, Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, October 21st, 2024. We are at the MEC and the time is 8:01 a.m. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Aaron Stone.
Here.
Bonnie Kim.
Here.
Allison Paplis.
Here.
Amy Paling.
Here.
Lisa Schneider-Faves. John Cesaretti.
Here.
Ann Hart.
Here. I seek a motion to approve the minutes of the September 9th, 2024 Committee of the Whole and Executive Session meetings.
I move to approve the minutes of the September 9th, 2024 Committee of the Whole and Executive Session meetings. Sorry.
May I have a second?
Second.
The motion has been made and seconded. Board members, are there any comments, errors, or omissions to the minutes? Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll?
Ann Hart.
Yes.
Bonnie Kim.
Yes.
Allison Paplis.
Yes.
Amy Paling.
Yes.
John Cesaretti.
Yes.
Aaron Stone.
Yes, motion carries. We're starting off with our Facility Development Committee. Mrs. Kim.
Thank you so much. I believe I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Bolton.
All right. So the first thing up is our junior high bid opening for next summer. We have Joe Papanikolaou from Nicholas here to walk us through.
All right, good morning, everyone. All right, so I have good news. Not to get into the weeds, but we had 3 bid packages for the summer 25 work. It's junior high, general trades bid package, and then mechanical and electrical. We had great contractor turnout, so we received anywhere from 3 to 4 bids per bid package. After scoping, am I okay? Okay. After scoping the apparent low bidders, we're at $2,064,000 for the cost of construction. So it came in extremely favorable. The last budget assessment we have, it was 85% construction documents. So as you've heard me say, I like to leave a little bit of conservativeness in the budgets, knowing that the design is still progressing. So we're in great shape from that standpoint. We have $150,000 in contingency within that $2,064,000 value for unforeseen conditions or potential owner added scope. So overall, we're great. With regards to the chiller, it was pre-purchased. It was assigned to the prime mechanical contractor, so they're responsible for turnkey scope of work for that piece of equipment. That ship date's November 6th. So the commitment letter went out in June, so it ended up being a 5-month lead time. So it worked out well that we initiated that order early on.
Thanks, Joe. That's great news.
Yep.
Does anybody have any questions?
I have a question. I don't know who's the person to answer it, but I was just looking at the bids and I wonder, are we always only solving for cost when we choose who we're going to go with, or is it
No, so
workmanship or whatever?
So the 2 bidders that you see that were deemed not responsible, they actually missed scope. Okay. So the electrical contractor, so the apparent low electrical contractor actually missed the allowance value in their bid. And then the mechanical contractor missed scope, actual scope. So that's one of the exercises when we do a thorough scope review is just to make sure that every contractor understands the design intent and has all scope accounted for. And if they don't, then we ask them to withdraw their bid without penalty, and then we go to the next bidder.
And the next bidder meaning the next.
Correct.
I had a question. So, Joe, why do you think it's so much lower than our initial?
It's a combination of that budget assessment was at 85% CDs, so there's still design going on, and then extremely favorable bidding, and that's just a product of being one of the first out for this next bid season. So this was one of our company's first bid openings. I think it was the second one of this next bid cycle. We still have 30 to go. But coming right out of the summer and being prepared to be out to bid, I think we talked about this in the past. It's always best to be the first out. Every month that goes by, numbers just go up because contractors fill their workload, and then there's not much incentive to be aggressive anymore. So especially even bidding after the new year, you have the lead time concerns, but you also you're going to pay a premium for it. Because their summer workload is full. So,
Well, my question was similar to John's. I know that in total, the bids came in lower than we were estimating, to your point, and I was just curious if it was, one of the bids specifically or a certain area specifically, or if it was just kind of across the board, and it seems like it was across the board favorable.
ultra aggressive bidding.
Yep,
So,
right.
yeah, usually we like to see a final control estimate, maybe a 95 to 99% CDs, but it's okay to do it a little earlier. You just need to assess it the right way.
Great, good news.
There are a group of teachers and staff over at WJHS who are going to be very excited to hear this news, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Corey?
Just before we move to the next item, one other thing I'll just add is, in looking back at like how we've kind of approached, like generally for these large projects, the first step is almost always approaching the board with like asking for authority for design. And when you think back to at least the time that I've been here, and then kind of looking back at what had occurred, in the 5 to 10 years before that, this past year we asked the board for design authority in March, which allowed the design team to take advantage of spring break and through the spring with design work. And before, and in many prior years, that ask had typically been June, sometimes August. I think once in a while it was May. But just having that earlier jump on the design, as we talked about it after the bid opening amongst the construction team, I think everybody felt like, starting early, allowing us to get out early was huge. And, so like the board authorizing that was very helpful. So thinking ahead to next year, we were already talking about sometime after the new year, and somewhere between, say, January and March, we'll probably come back to the board thinking about the summer of 2026. So it's just something worth noting. And then the next item is what is now becoming an annual application for a state maintenance grant. ISB has been the last 3 years. They're finally starting to consistently allocate and budget money to this program. And when I look at the amount that they have budgeted for the 2025 application process, it looks like maybe 100 to 125 grants potentially available beyond the number of school districts in the state. So one of the reasons we're asking the board to take action today, which is a little abnormal for us, is next Monday night, we'll be asking the board to approve the bids, but the application needs to be submitted to ISB prior to the board taking action on that. So that's why we're asking for that today. And based upon the last couple of years, it seems very likely that we would get the grant for $50,000. Any questions on that?
Thanks, Corey.
Yep.
Mrs. Stone?
Thank you. All good news. All right, we're moving on to school finance. Mr. Cesaretti.
Thank you, Ms. Stone. I think I'm gonna turn it over to Corey to talk through the first part of the tax levy process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so annually, as we get into the fall, going through the tax levy process is there's multi-steps to that. Usually we talk about it at multiple board meetings. Here's kind of the calendar of what we're looking at this fall. Today, we'll take a look at it, and then we'll do something similar next Monday night. One of the requirements is for the board to actually adopt a resolution of an estimated levy, and then also set that public hearing announcement. We put a notice in the paper. Then the target is November 18th. We would hold that public hearing and then ask the board to approve the 2024 levy. And then sometime after that, but before the end of the calendar year, we would file all of our paperwork with Cook County. All right, so a little bit of background. For us, we are, what's considered to be a heavily locally funded school district, so a little over 80% of our total revenue comes from property taxes. One of the big things that plays into this whole equation as I'm walking through, how do we arrive at tax rates and what we're ultimately able to extend to the community is the property tax extension limitation law, or PTEL. It's been in place since the mid to early 90s. The biggest thing that it does is that it caps our increase from the prior year's amount to a CPI factor, plus an additional amount for any new property growth, which is from construction within our boundaries. And then there are three big things that kind of move the equation that I like to focus in on in each year. EAV, equalized assessed value. That's determined at the county level. EAV is a little different than market value. So let's say someone has a market value, a home of a market value of 600,000. The EAV, at least the way property taxes are done in this state, it's intended to be taxed at 200,000, or a third, roughly 1/3 of market value. CPI is something that's measured across the country and publicly available. And then new property growth. We see some level of new property growth. Sometimes it's just residential. Sometimes it's a mix of that and business development. But yeah, that's something that is really important to any school district that's under the PTEL. And the one challenge is that while we know that there will be new growth every year, until that final extension comes out, usually sometime next summer, we don't know the exact amount, and Cook County doesn't give it to us until basically they're finishing. So that provides some challenges in and of itself. All right, so this next slide shows 10 years of historical CPI percentages. One of the things I like about looking at this particular slide, other than you see the far right column, the last 2 years we've been capped at 5%. This year that we're talking about now, we're at 3.4%. That was the 2023 calendar year CPI. But if you look at those first four columns, it shows the progression that, as we know something from calendar year 23, it really doesn't impact our budgeting or our finances until 3 years later in 2026. So what the board's doing over the next couple of months is really helping to set what our budget's going to be on the revenue side for 2026. All right, so this slide shows our historical new growth in EAV amounts. Got 10 years of data. So when I look at our 10-year average of new growth, we're at 15.9 million. You do see some fluctuations. Those years where you see in 2022, we had the 22 million, or 2018 where we had the 24 million. Those are the years where some of the bigger multi-unit developments come online come on the tax rolls. And years where it's maybe a little bit lower, those are years where you're primarily just seeing residential rebuilds within the community. Over on the right-hand column, where I've noted the change in existing EAV, there's three bolded percentages. Those percentages represent reassessment years. So those are the years we tend to see the biggest swings in changes in EAV when the assessor is going around. I have slated in as an estimate that the existing component of EAV will probably drop a couple of percent for this 2024 tax levy year. Not just looking at historical, the last year before you reassess, which would be the 25 tax year for this area, tends to see a decrease in EAV.
Can I slow you down, just make sure I'm understanding? I think what you said is really important. So yeah, I look at that 2022 swing in EAV to basically 25%. So we think that is from just the reassessment of the North Shore?
Yep.
So the next one is gonna be
2025 tax year. So we're doing 2024 now.
Yeah.
So they'll be getting ready to do another reassessment fairly soon. That's when we tend to see the biggest swings. And the thing that is even more challenging, and I know that in most recent tax bills and talking with counterparts at other districts in Cook County, is even within each year, but particularly in a reassessment year, while we might have the totals, this includes every property type within the D39 boundaries. And the one thing that kind of gets lost in that for homeowners is if there is some level of concerted effort at the assessor level and you see shifts between residential and business or commercial type properties, which has happened. There have been times where across the board, like we might see a 24% change, but we might be telling homeowners that, hey, your bill should only be going up 5%. But if there's a big shift between commercial or business values and residential, then there's going to be an even bigger shift in the tax burden to like resident. And that has happened at different times in the last 20 years.
Really, really appreciate that. So the 25 reassessment, when does that show up on it?
So 25 tax levy is paid so the year that we're like taxing, we're like submitting paperwork to Cook County, it's the following calendar years when it actually goes out to the taxpayers. So 25 tax levy year, everyone will pay their bills in 2026 calendar year. All right, let's move to the next one. So as the county goes through, one of the things for them to do once they get the CPI percentages are known, once they know the values of the existing properties, they need to calculate a limiting rate. And here's a formula that shows it. The importance of calculating the limiting rate is it goes onto the bills and it helps them to extend the bills, but it also is the factor by which the value of new growth gets added on top. It's the rate that gets taxed. And so even though this formula is important and it's there, the biggest takeaway for any like existing taxpayer, someone who's been living here, is that like our portion, barring some shift between residential and commercial, we would expect taxpayers' bill to increase by 3.4% for this levy year. All right, so in here, trying to demonstrate the value of new property growth. The CPI thing, I think many people understand, that's going to go up and down, and that our ability is limited between 0 and 5%. So the first column is we start at the top with our existing EAV, and then we work our way down to the bottom half, and with a 3.4% CPI, the district would have an operating fund levy of $67.1 million. So that would be about $2.2 million higher than last year just due to CPI. So then we go to the middle column and we look at, okay, what would 10-year average of new property growth be? 15.9 million is what we've averaged. We go to the bottom of that column and we see that would have an additional tax value to D39 of $488,000. So about the equivalent of like a 0.75%, tacked on top of the CPI. Then we go to the far right, and because we don't know what that new property growth is at the time that the board's voting, we are requesting a higher amount, knowing that the county will ultimately limit it to whatever our new growth actually is. And the last few years, we've kind of ballooned or increased that request about 2.4% higher than what that current year CPI is. And so that captures up to a potential of about 50 million in new property growth, which when we look back going, 20 years or more of data, that should definitely cover any new growth within this tax year and with what we would expect to see. But you see that the amount is much larger at 1.5 there in the bottom right corner. All right. So our 2004 estimated tax extension and levy request. This is one of the requirements that we're doing, is that middle column is estimating it. So 2023 final tax extension is the first column. I've have like a subtotal. That's our operating funds, the 64.9 million. And then at the bottom, we have two things that get tacked on outside of the operating amount. The Senate Bill 508 adjustment is annually the Cook County takes a look at what refunds were processed, and of the allowable refunds, they will add that on to our tax extension. And for the 23 tax year, it was 457,000. And then the debt service amount of 1.84 million. That amount is given, those amounts are given to Cook County at the time that any taxing body issues bonds for which they have the ability to recoup that principal and interest from their taxpayers. The middle column is the estimated, so that's more of what like we think is going to happen, as the 15.9 million in growth. 67.59 is what we would think our operating funds will hit at. An estimate of the refund recapture is 433,000. That number is not known yet for this tax year. It'll probably come available at the very end of November or sometime in December. No action is required of the board. The county just tacks it on. And then looking at our principal and interest that's due for this tax year, we're looking at an extension amount of 1.9 million. And then you see in our far right, in our column, that's our tax levy request. And each line item within the request is a little bit higher than what we are estimating. And so our total tax levy request, as it's constructed right now, would be 5.8% for the 24 tax year, 3.4% for CPI, and 2.4% for new property growth. And then the last slide. Go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. There's a lot.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, so I don't know if everybody remembers Senate Bill 508. That was, I think, really important to us. And it's, my recollection was that this is so we used to pay out property tax refunds.
Yep.
Out of essentially our funds.
Yep.
And now they're being reimbursed.
Yeah. So one of the drivers of that from like the taxing body, but particularly school districts, was when like a taxpayer, whether you're a business or a homeowner, you get your assessment and you look at it, and it typically happens most frequently in the reassessment years, and you look at it and you say, that's way out of line. There's legal mechanisms in place for people to appeal. And there's multiple paths in our state, and one path leads to where that value is either held firm or reduced, but it's done before the extension, the final extension is calculated and occurred. And if that happens, then there was really no penalty to like the taxing bodies. But what was happening more frequently is those things were playing out. People would file, taxpayers, particularly large ones, would file appeals. It would drag on well past when it was calculated, and sometimes it could be years down the road. And depending upon what you have within your boundaries, sometimes small taxing bodies had one really large taxpayer business or something that was just proportionally very large. If they were successful or they came to a settlement, say 3 years down the road, well, there's no way to go back and recapture that for the taxing body. So it was pretty punitive for certain taxing bodies more than others. This law came about that the Cook County goes through and they look at all those refunds that are processed after the extension has been calculated, and it is a way to then put it back and allow those taxing bodies, but primarily school districts, to kind of recapture that. Because what would happen is you would see that like for tax year 2023, you'd be like, oh, District 39 is getting 67.2 million. Well, when you factor in for refunds, you're probably losing like 1%, or it could be 1.5% or whatever it is down the road. And so this was a mechanism to try and rectify that. All right. So the last slide is just a requirement that's been added to like the budgeting and the tax levy process. At May this year, we had 52.4 million in cash and investment balances. And this is just the breakdown by fund. Happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Any questions?
And
Just out of curiosity, so if you request a higher amount for new property growth, and then ultimately you only get the actual amount, correct? What if you come in under? Does the same apply and they,
Lose it.
I thought so,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
So
so-
that's why it's so critical to
Yeah.
make sure that you are at least at
Yeah.
or above that
Yeah.
number, right?
Like, and so the challenging part when you think about this and like what gets, published in local papers and particularly like in other jobs that I've held where as soon as you have a board meeting, it immediately gets published. And so if you request, because you're just trying to not lose anything, well, it inherently means that you're asking for a higher percentage. Now that's out there, even though we know we're only going to get this smaller amount. So it does create a level of confusion. But the worst part is if you were to miss, and the reason most people balloon, or in some cases people get really borderline excessive in their ballooning, is that if you don't capture it all, you lose it, and you just don't really have that ability to go back and.
thanks, Ann. Yeah, yeah. You made it seem so simple, Corey. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did, I always, so years and years ago, when I was first on the board, I had my own theory for why I thought taxes were so high. And it went something like wages stagnated for a long time, but costs went up. And I always worry about, PTEL, CPI kind of is what it is. But I always thought it was worth keeping an eye on wages going up as well to kind of match the two, and I'm not sure they always match. Although I think we've been lucky for the last, so many years with wages going up. So, since this is my last extension, I figured I would say something. Thank you. Thank you, Corey.
Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Caesarretti?
No, that's it.
Okay.
Thank you,
all
Ms.
right.
Stone.
Thank you. For our strategy items, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Cremascoli.
Thank you very much. In fact, we have several strategy committee updates, and we will start with a review of our fall math assessments and AIMWeb assessments, and then move into our SEL, and finally finish up with some updates regarding our key performance indicators for goals 2, 3, and 4. So Katie and Kristen are going to get us started with the fall math assessment report.
We're actually going to start with Kristen and AIMSWeb Plus.
So as a reminder, every year our kindergartners and first graders take AIMSWeb screening measures 3 times a year, fall, winter, and spring. And we do use that data in order to help inform our instruction in our general education classrooms, as well as identify students who may need additional enrichment or intervention. So first we have our early literacy measures. As you may recall that last year we added 2 new measures so that we could we made some changes in what we were doing in terms of early literacy that we felt would better reflect what our student and teachers needed in terms of making decisions around student learning and adjusting their instruction. So this is, again, just a baseline for this school year. Obviously, our kindergartners are a whole new group every year, so we use this data to really help inform what we're going to be doing, what we need to focus on with our kindergartners as we move forward, and then our first grade teachers are doing the same thing and looking at the students that they have and where we need to provide instruction. Similarly, our early numeracy is the same thing. It provides a good baseline for us. It lets us know how our children are performing. Again, our kindergartners are brand new. We did add a couple of new measures for our kindergartners this year. In the past, we have not done formal AIMSWeb assessment in the fall. So we are doing number, naming fluency, and quantity total fluency for them this year. That is new. We've always done it in winter and spring, but with our use of having our new math specialists and our new curriculum, this was a recommendation that we heard from all of them to try and identify additional, like where our students are coming in and what instruction we need to provide. So This is again baseline and information that we will be using as we move forward throughout the school year. We'll be tracking this again in the winter, and then this will inform our KPIs in the spring.
And for all the same reasons that Kristen mentioned, for second through eighth grade, we use NWA MAP. And so this is also baseline data for us. Just as a reminder, 3 times a year, fall, winter, spring, is when we administer this assessment in reading and mathematics. The RIT scores that you see that we share with you is a RASH unit. They are equal interval scales, and the assessment is adaptive, which means that as students answer questions, that it increases the difficulty and complexity of the questions. Now, there's a lot of information that's going to be presented to you in many different ways. And this is our way of demonstrating the ways in which we break down and analyze where our students starting the year, see if there's any trends of upward movement or significant declines to help us reflect on our instruction and adjust it as needed. So this is just an overall view. We have broken this down to the last 4 years. So the green being this current year, fall of 2024. And this is in mathematics, the same information, with the black bar being our national mean RIT. Our students continue to demonstrate high achievement. They also, according to the NWA norms, the 2020 norms, which do not include the COVID years, so that's really important to point out. So our students are performing well above grade level peers. When you look at some of the percentages in the bottom blue row, you'll notice anywhere from 76 to 89% of our students perform 50th percentile or above their national peers. That's a really good indicator of how well our students are performing. So you will see a breakdown again in different graphs to demonstrate the 2024 fall. But if you look at this chart and you look diagonally, you will also see the cohort view as well. So if you look vertically, then it's different students. So each year represents a different set of students as we go through this. All right. So the cohort trends for reading, we wanted to share with you. So our current second graders all the way to our current eighth graders, and tracking back 4 years. If you look at our current fourth graders, just as an example, currently our 2024 fall, 88% of our students are performing at or above the 50th percentile. And then in third grade, which is the red bar, it was 80%. And then in second grade, it was 77%. So when we look back to the other grade levels and the current third grade and second grade, we can see that we are on par looking forward. And then the cohort trends for math, same applies, just a different content area. And then we'll show you by grade level. So this is second grade reading and math, and this is the average fall RIT score. So what we look for are any significant increases or dips, and we're pretty consistent across the board in reading and in math. And then if you break it down into the subcategories, again, we look at this to see where there's relative strength. So using second grade as an example, we have a 3-point RIT increase in literary text. We have informational text, slight increase, as well as in vocabulary. And this is the subcategories of operations and algebraic thinking, numbers and operations, measurement and data, and geometry for second grade. Again, this is baseline data for us. So this is our starting point, and then we will monitor progress in winter, and then ultimately in the spring. So for the rest of these bar graphs, I'm just going to run through the grade levels for you. Yes.
So just, I know you've
Oh.
spoken to this before, but
Yeah.
just, can you remind us, when you talk about a slight difference, like what are you looking at that would catch your eye for a written difference?
Anywhere between like a significant dip would be 4 RIT points, right? So when we look at our average RITs and we notice that our average is a full grade level higher than our current students. First of all, that's the bar. The bar is that we're already performing a grade level higher. But then within our local comparisons of students, we wouldn't want it to dip, more than 4.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Well, then in that vein, then we would celebrate, anything that's higher than
Yes.
4 or higher as well. So when I shared with you that this is our fall baseline, what we look for patterns and trends, you'll notice that there wasn't any significant dips. There were some increases, but pretty much if looking at each grade level and each of the subcategories, we're pretty consistent when we're a plus or minus about 2 or 3. So this is the cohort views of reading and math progressions and for reading assessment. This is where you will see where you were limited before to 4 years. This will be tracking our 8th graders all the way back to when they were 2nd grade. We like to look at our progression for the full educational experience. It is not a singular grade that we look at, but we also want to look at, is there anything significant that we should notice when we look at the education from 2nd grade all the way up. So this is where we're starting in comparison to the national average for 2nd grade. We have fall 2023, and then spring, which is a different color we looked at with an orange, and then a fall 2024 for 3rd grade. So that's where our current 3rd graders are. And the same information cohort for the math assessment. I know that was just a review of the slides that you have viewed, and we really wanted to just show how we monitor progress and see if there's anything significant to notice. I think the one that might be of note is our current 4th graders. I don't know if you look at the chart that I demonstrated before, like this one. You'll notice that our students significantly increased from 3rd grade from 80% to 88% being above. And I think that is a nod to a lot of the work that we've been doing and the teachers have been addressing within the area of reading as well. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Any questions? I just had one comment. If I understand it correctly, you made additions to what you were assessing for K through 1 for literacy?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we made some changes, not last summer, but the summer before. We worked with the reading specialists and looked at our measures that we were using and how they were informing our instruction. So we made a few adjustments.
Okay. No, I was going to say I applaud that decision. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes, thank you.
So up next, we have our social emotional learning assessment report. Kelly Jackson is going to walk us through this assessment report.
Today, I'm going to share with you a look at the results from the fall administration of our 2 SEL assessments. We actually just finished this and closed the assessments on Friday, so this is hot off the presses. We use 2 assessment tools to monitor SEL competency development for our students. At K4, we use the Insights. It was formerly known as CellWeb. They're undergoing a transition. They were bought out by a different company. And that is student completed. In the past, we had used another assessment tool that was completed by teachers, but last year, if you'll recall, we made the decision just to go with these 2 because they were more used and better information for us. At 5th through 8th grade, we use the MESH, or Mindsets, Essential Skills and Habits Assessment, and that's out from Panorama. They're basically used to help look at trends, provide information to teachers for instructional purposes, and to connect teachers with resources available in. The CellWeb, or Insights CellWeb, is a narrated assessment taken online by students in grades K through 4. Students are given situations and are asked to choose the way that they feel or choose a reaction that best illustrates the problem. Some tasks challenge self-control, and other tasks ask students to identify emotions or respond to the emotions being expressed. There's 2 versions of the Insights. The EE is early elementary, so that's taken by kindergarten through 3rd graders, and that measures social emotional competency development in the areas of emotional recognition, social perspective taking, social problem solving, and self-control. And the LE is just for 4th grade. It means later elementary. And that measures development in understanding others, social problem solving, self-control, and self-awareness. So here you can see in the early elementary CellWeb, 90% of students demonstrated average or above average strengths in the overall category. This is noted on the farthest graph to the left, which is the overall score. The lightest green there is above average, and kind of the next darker is average, and so we group those 2 together for a positive rate. 8% fell in the next darker green, which is the below average category, and 2% fell in the well below average, which is the darkest color green in that bar. The other 4 columns break down the individual competency areas. As you may recall from last year, we are targeting emotion recognition, and social perspective taking as 2 areas that we want to focus our lessons using everyday speech in the elementary SEL curriculum. Similarly, in the SEL Web LE for the 4th graders, 97% were in the average or above average scores overall. This is baseline data, so we will use this to target areas again as we move through the year. The 2 areas that we are targeting at 4th grade, similar to the early elementary assessment, are understanding others and social problem solving. So our goal is to increase the average and the above average areas in both of those categories as we progress through the year. Moving on to 5th through 8th graders, the Panorama Mesh Survey is given in the fall and the spring, and it has 2 components: the social emotional competencies and student environment and supports. The results, similar to the CellWeb, they help us look at trends and target our instruction. It also gives us some insight into students and school climate, how they feel supported in their environment at school. Areas targeted in the student competency questionnaire include supportive relationships, self-management, social awareness, positive feelings, challenging feelings, emotion regulation, Also in 6th through 8th grades, social perspective taking. In the student supports and environment questionnaire, they include school safety, sense of belonging, school climate, and teacher-student relationships, as well as valuing of school. The mesh is grouped in 3 through 5 or 6 through 8. And so we give the 3 through 5 to our 5th graders and the 6 through 8 to our 6th through 8th graders. So that's divided up on the screen here. This is the SEL competency scores for 5th graders. 5th graders demonstrate strengths in all areas based on comparison to all grade levels at a national level. You can see that in the green dots to the right. We are at the 80th to 99th percentile and really on the closer to the 99th on each area based on the percent of favorable responses, which is highlighted in that middle column. When we looked at the percent of 5th graders who responded favorably to questions in these categories, we see that a strength for our students is in supportive relationships and self-management, social awareness and positive feelings. This year with our new Wayfinder curriculum, we'll be using lessons such as respectful disagreement and comfortably uncomfortable to target the areas of challenging feelings and emotion regulation for 5th graders. So we're really excited to have this new curriculum to support these areas. For 6th through 8th grade, these are the competencies. And again, you can see that we have strengths in really all areas across the board. While our students exhibit strengths in these areas, the areas of emotion regulation and social perspective taking are lower in the percent of favorable responses. Those are the last two bars there. So 67% and 58%. So again, we have our new Wayfinder curriculum at 6th through 8th grade. And we'll be using different lessons to target it at 6th graders. 6th grade examples are getting to know your emotions and our shared story and own your perspective. That will help with those two categories. 7th grade lessons such as befriending emotions and creating a journey map where students kind of tell their own story through their whole life. Celebrating ourselves in 7th grade is important. And 8th grade lessons such as your support language, my story, your story, and recharging our batteries will all target emotion regulation and social perspective. Now let's turn to the second component of the mesh, the supports and environment component. You'll see here 5th grade results show a high percentage of favorable responses in all of these areas, except for looking at valuing of school and school climate. We would want to target those areas a little bit more. You'll see in the green dots, that's compared to all schools nationally. Last year we took a look closer in at just comparing to middle schools. And so we are on that high end when you're just compared with middle schoolers, 90th to 99th percentile. We will be looking though at some of these areas. They do align with our CSCI that we'll be talking about in a few minutes. And the areas that students respond to. And so we want to look at specifically that valuing of school and school climate and see if there are areas that we can target using our Wayfinder curriculum, using other activities that we do during the day. The valuing of school is especially an area where we dig into the questions and it looks like students say, you know, at a lower rate that they are applying things that they learned in school outside of the day. So how can we as teachers and educators make those connections to them, to what they're learning in the classroom, to what's going on outside, so that increases that value of school. I think it's kind of typical of kids to say, oh, I don't use anything in the outside of the day, but it's also something that we want to make sure that we're building for them. Moving on to the next slide. This slide shows the mesh results for student supports and environment for 6th through 8th graders on the mesh. So you can see again, we broke it out from all grade levels to the middle school there. And really, when compared to the middle school, in all categories, we're at 90th to 99th percentile, even in sense of belonging, that's really high, I think, based on what we've seen in years past. So that's a positive for us for that baseline. But then in school climate, you'll see that's pretty low there with the 20th to 39th percentile at all grade levels and 70th when compared to middle schoolers. So within school climate, lower favorable areas are that students feel that fewer students follow the rules and say that the rules are somewhat fair. So the somewhat gets a lot of percentage points. Some students follow the rules and somewhat fair, but that's counted in the less favorable responses. So we want to take a look at what we're doing with respect to the rules. I think a lot of the foundations work, and pointing at Kristen, because there's been so much work done in our schools that will contribute to that feeling of fairness and equity among the rules and processes that we're following on a school-wide basis. So, and there's work being done every day to that effect. So we also just recently at Highcrest and well, at the end of the month at Highcrest, but this year in in 7th and 8th grade, we adopted a pass system. You may have heard about it if you have a student at the junior high, just for students going to the bathroom and having a more effective practice that way. And so we know where students are during the day, and it kind of takes that mystery out of it. Treats everybody pretty fairly. So we hoped that will grow over the course of the year. I have a question. Yeah.
Oh, did you?
I'll go after you.
Oh, okay, thanks. Sorry, I didn't hear you. So I just had a quick question about this, the mesh. When you talk about all grade levels, you're talking 3 through 8?
They go down even further.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah,
So-
so it's elementary and middle school and also high school. So there's like the whole spectrum.
But we only use it for our 5th through 8th.
Only through 5th grade. That's why we just compare with the middle school.
And so what is middle school?
We consider middle school at 5th through 8th.
Oh, okay. And is the reason why the numbers would be different in terms of like those last 2 graphics or on the page is because kids who are younger than those in 5th grade might be more yes, and that you get more
Yes.
nuanced as you get
Yeah.
older?
Yes, definitely. And I think we've seen that as the kids get older through the years. We used to give the mesh to 3rd and 4th graders as well, and they would typically be on the higher end, whereas our 5th grade declines.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question. So I think this is so helpful in hearing how you use this data in terms of tailoring the curriculum and addressing the areas of need. I think you've spoken about this in the past, but do you ever use this for individual students? So if something comes up that's a real need for the younger students, that you share that with families? Are you doing, rather than the class level, but I would imagine there might be some things that show up as real concern.
Yeah, so the purpose of these assessments is really to look at trends overall and to pinpoint instruction, but we do get student level data. And so it's used as a data point if we're doing any problem solving for a student with respect to social emotional difficulties that they might be having. It is one data point, so we have some other tools that we might bring into play, as well as classroom observations and that sort of thing. But certainly it can be pulled in if it's.
Any other questions? Okay.
I had a recollection. Did we years ago, did we talk about, sorry, I don't remember this right, having like more after school activities and clubs and stuff like that? And then I think we did it, and we thought it was very positive.
Yeah, and in fact, we're continuing that at 5th through 8th grade for sure. We do a lot of lunch clubs, which we've found is a big bang for the buck, if you will, because the kids have so many after-school activities outside that they love to be involved at recess. It also plays into our CRC report with offering unstructured opportunities for play at recess, especially at that level. And so we have things like Tinker Tuesday at Highcrest, where the kids just go into the makerspace and play with things. So yes, we are continuing to offer a lot.
Anyone else? No, I wondered if there was a direct result of that to the sense of belonging, because it seems like we could assume that, and that it's something to celebrate.
Definitely our aim, right? In offering those, we're trying to improve students' connections and sense of belonging to school and to one another while they're at school. And then also that sense of agency for students. There's some voice and some agency for students to create clubs or share ideas about what they'd like to be doing during lunch and after school. And so both of those aspects of our strategic plan are intended to be effective through those clubs and those additional opportunities for our students. And they've been wildly popular, so it's been really nice to see that.
We had 20 students stay on a Friday afternoon for Dungeons and Dragons Club. So that's a big number on a Friday afternoon. So,
Thank you.
Okay, if there aren't any other questions about that, we have a few topics we wanted to review and discuss with the board related to our key performance indicators. We've made a couple of adjustments and are continuing to analyze some of the data as we make progress with our strategic plan. Kelly and Heather are going to walk us through a couple of items. Excuse me.
so when we had the strategic plan in alrighty. We used the 5 essentials to build our KPIs for goals 2 and 3. Last year, we decided to adjust what we were using to measure school climate to the Comprehensive School Climate Inventory, or CSCI. And so this report will show an analysis of how those two line up and where we are recommending to go with our CPI or with our KPIs, not CPI. That's Corey's. So this first chart is goal 2, our supportive community, and that's really about our student responses and how students, their perspective on the school environment. And so you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, the 5 essentials, and that was areas such as peer support for academic work, teacher-student trust, safety, etc. And the overall category was called supportive environment. That's why I have 2 stars next to it. In 5 essentials, the way that the ratings work is that the goal for us, for our KPIs, was 80 plus in these areas. They call 60 to 79, the score of 60 to 79 strong, and 80 plus very strong. So we were trying to get to very strong in all of these categories. And you can see that they range from 61 to 90 in a couple of areas. Looking at the CSCI, we took the questions and the categories and really tried to align those to the different categories on the CSCI. So, for example, peer support for academic work and student peer relationships aligns with the broader category of peer relationships. Some similar questions there. Teacher-student relationships is really about teacher-student trust, and then some of those human and social resources, and so on and so forth. Looking at our CSCI scores from the spring, the way that those are scored, anything above 3.5 is considered positive. 2.5 to 3.4 is neutral, and then below 2.5 is negative. And you can see we are above 3.5 in all of these categories. In fact, we're above 4 or at 4 in most of them. The sense of social emotional security is one area that we pinpointed last year during our report that we are going to set some goals and work on throughout this year. But we would recommend then for, as we move on to this recommendation, for our KPI to really focus on increasing in all of these areas across the board. So I think we are very encouraged by the scores that are above the 3.5. That tells us that we are doing some really good work, but we would hope to continue to improve upon that work and increase in the areas listed on.
So for goal 3, similar perspective, the 5 essential data is there from 23, and you can see the areas that we looked at with 5 essentials is effective leaders, collaborative teachers, and involved families. Kelly and I did literally a crosswalk of the survey stems, if you will, for 5 essentials and CSCI to see where we would see the correlation between, they don't align perfectly, to be very clear, but when we got down to the granular level of the survey stems, we were able to align these as best we could in these categories. So you'll see for goal 3, looking at effective leaders, we think the survey stems related to rules and norms and administration and leadership align most closely to that area in 5 essentials. And so that's essentially what we tried to do, is show kind of the alignment between the two. As Kelly shared, we're looking for 3.5 and above in all of the CSCI areas. We're there already, but we know we have room to grow. And so the action steps for this school year are really at the school level in these areas. So looking at each school and how we might improve in these areas related to the CSCI measures. And so our recommendation is similar to goal 2 in that we're looking to see an increase in those specific areas of the CSCI rules and norms, administration, leadership, social emotional learning, etc. But this was the best way we could connect where we started with the measure in 21 and how we're likely to end our strategic plan in 26. Questions?
My question. It's for Kelly, so I don't know what. Can you just, and maybe you've said this before, but what does sense of social emotional security mean?
So it's under the safety area, because there's the physical security and then there's that social emotional security. So that's kind of where that sense of belonging plays in, and feeling comfortable at school and comfortable in classes. So it's more in line with some of the questions on the MESH survey, where we're talking about sense of belonging and feeling like you are important at school and people value you. I think along with that too, we had some questions or some areas that we looked at when we were looking at the answers or the responses from the CSCI that really fell in the area of what does being an upstander mean? And so we are targeting a lot of those upstander areas for our students and communicating a lot more to parents about upstander behaviors as well. And that can play into that social emotional security.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on that? All right, I think Dr. Glowacki is going to walk us through some points related to our key performance indicators for our professional community.
Thank
Some
you.
updated data.
Yep. So for goal 3, a lot of our data from last school year we don't have until this point in the new school year. And so while we get a lot of great updates from the other goals in June and even kind of mid-year, this is the opportunity for us to share data related to goal 3 mostly. The first KPI indicator that we look at is the teacher retention rate, and you can see that we continue to be above 90% for teachers, which is the goal. Last year we hit 92. We're currently at 91 from fall of 24, which would be reflective of the 23-24 school year. Our staff retention is trending in the right area, but it is not quite at that 90%. You may recall from previous conversations that we know that 90% for non-teaching positions is high. It's still something we're aiming for. Not sure we'll get there, but we're continuing to try and move the needle in that direction. We recognize that not everyone that takes non-teaching positions intends to stay in those positions for their entire career, and yet our goal would be that we have happy staff who are working in positions that they want to be in. So that's good news. Our indicators related to why staff leave District 39. So again, you'll recall probably from previous presentations, we continue to do exit interviews, either in person or Google form, depending on what the employee who's leaving is most comfortable with. We offer either approach. The questions are exactly the same, whether we do them in person or via Google form. And this tends to be more of a qualitative analysis in terms of why people are leaving. You can see it kind of fluctuates over the course of the 3 years. There isn't a strong trend. The one that I tend to look at most is staff that are leaving us to go to another district in a similar role. That to me piques the biggest question. And last year in 22, 23, we saw an increase in that, and we're kind of back now to where we were when we started. And so for me, that's an indicator that I like to see pretty well. Everything else is understandable, I think. 5 essential survey data. I left this slide in here simply as a reminder that this is an element we're measuring. Kelly and I just shared with you that we're changing that to CSCI. So this essentially is old data, and we'll be updating it to reflect CSCI, but didn't want to do that without sharing the CSCI information with you that we just did. So that will ultimately get updated. And then we talk about staff absences. This is news that is probably not as exciting to share because we're kind of holding steady with our licensed staff. We're about 38% of staff using with 10 or more absences. Sorry, 10% or less of licensed staff with 10 or more absences is our goal. We're not quite there yet. We're sort of plateauing with regard to licensed staff, and we've seen an increase in staff who are non-licensed taking time off. We had hoped initially when we set this goal that this might be an indicator of all the other things that we were doing, right? Related, if these absences are an impact climate and culture, that the other elements that we're taking as action steps might favorably impact this data. We're not seeing that. And so we have more work to do, quite honestly. Partnering with Joshua Swanner in CNI to look to see if there are trends or a specific employee group that might be demonstrating more absences and how we might better support them or learn from them. But this is where we're at in terms of the data. And unfortunately, it's not, again, not where we want to be, but it indicates that we have more work to do to try and figure out the why.
Can I ask a quick question?
Please.
So if I'm reading this correctly, these numbers like the 38, that means that 38% of staff are using 10 days or more. Okay.
Yes, and just as a reminder, that is the way the state reports it on the state report card. So these are data that we can kind of look at. There is certainly research to support the effect of staff being absent from work. And across the state, we can kind of do some comparisons. I'll share, late last week, I was at the AASA National Superintendent's Convention program that I'm part of, and this actually was a significant topic. So it is a significant area of concern for districts locally. I was able to collaborate with a few really hyper-local districts and superintendents, but nationally, this is a trend that superintendents and school districts are really struggling with. And so I gathered a few ideas of some things to look at, but I think most importantly, the work that Heather is leading and really looking at what's happening for our staff here is really important for us to examine before we can start to affect this even more. As Heather shared, we thought that really digging into our culture and climate, really digging into our rules and expectations at the school level, providing some additional support and professional development, each of those items we hoped would have an impact on this. And we haven't seen that yet, so we're going to keep looking. Yes.
Is this a trend like in the last 5 years, you're saying, or
It
since
seems
COVID,
post-COVID,
Uh-huh.
And I think all of us can recognize that through COVID, there were some shifts in how everyone nationally was working that may be having an impact here because we don't have the opportunity to work remotely. We don't have the same flexibility, excuse me, in teacher schedules as someone who's working in the business profession might. So we definitely are seeing that. This is the one indicator that pretty much across the board doesn't seem to be rebounding post-COVID as much as every other indicator has. So there's there are some things to examine there. And again, not just something that is of concern here. It seems to be locally of concern when I collaborate with other township superintendents, but really nationally, it's an area of concern. Heather, did you have something else to mention?
The only other piece that I'll add is that our KPI data includes all licensed staff. So it's administrators, teachers, psychologists, social workers. The data that's given by the State Board of Ed that you'll see on our report card is only teachers. It filters out all other professions, like social workers, psychologists. It's not inclusive of everybody. And so I share that only because this may not perfectly align with the data that's reported on our school report card, but we did that very intentionally when we set this KPI. So I just wanted to clarify that.
And that number is what? If it's just teachers? Do you know? No.
I don't. I would need to look that up.
Higher or lower?
We will be sharing the school report card.
October 30th,
October 30th.
9 a.m. That's when it goes public.
Yeah.
All right, I'll be ready.
So our school report, so the past year will be publicly on October 30th.
But Allison, these are the right questions to be asking, and exactly what we're trying to look at as well, because we have classroom teachers, we have specialist teachers, we have related services personnel, we have special education teachers. All of those fall under our licensed staff category here, and then our non-licensed staff would be the additional support staff and others who help our schools to run and function and are so necessary.
I don't know if there's any way to do this, but it would be helpful to get that, like, information from those people who have missed lots of school about what are the factors that, in a really non-judgmental way, like as a way to just be helpful for us to problem solve, but I don't know. I don't offer a solution about how you go about that, but it sure would be helpful to know what's making it hard for people to be here.
And you're pointing out exactly the sensitivity to this, because if people are ill or needing time, we want them to use the time that they have. And if they don't, why are they taking the time, right? And so that sensitivity piece about the why is important, but the who is asking it is also impactful.
Right.
Administration versus others. And so that's the work that we're starting to dig in even deeper on.
I wonder if there's a way to do it anonymously, or I don't know the right way, but if it's a national issue, it's like, well, we have to be understanding of that, and we can't really problem solve it if we don't know what people are doing. If their kids are sick, or they're sick, or there's no time to make appointments, you know.
All those things.
Right.
We have to really look at.
I do have one last indicator to share, and that is another element that we were looking at the start of the strategic plan, which is how often are we pulling our paraprofessionals from their regular assignment to fill in, whether it's subbing because we don't have enough subs, or because we haven't hired for a position that is more critical and we've taken someone out of their current position to fill in. You can see we've made some nice gains and improvements in that area, which has been exciting. But it doesn't address the absence piece, right? So in my mind, it's still this question of how are we doing this, but still having so many absences. I think qualitatively, this speaks to the number of positions that we've been able to fill, that we have far less unfilled positions, meaning we've hired for the positions that we've allocated, whereas in the past, we maybe haven't been as successful. And I think that speaks to our new support staff contract that certainly helped that process. But we're still improving this area even with the absences that are being reported. So lots of questions sparked even more as a result of the data.
Is the amount of substitutes we have going up or holding steady, or?
It's interesting. So we have increased the number of subs. I am interviewing probably once a month, if not twice a month, batches of subs. That's not to say that they're all working, however. Meaning, right, there's no requirement that once you become a sub to District 39 that you work X amount of days. We ask for 10 a semester at a minimum just to keep you active, but even that is somewhat forgiving. But yes, we continue to increase that subtotal. I'm sure that helps and is impactful on this data as well. It's probably a combination of multiple variables.
Thank you.
If there aren't any other questions or related to any of these strategy items, we will turn it back to you.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. My apologies.
I thought we had to pull for you. It's okay. No, I thought maybe I was confused. Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Kelly. Really brief.
No,
I
please,
have
go ahead.
two things. So this is just a reminder from our school dashboard, our strategic plan dashboard of the transition information that we collect for the 6th to 7th grade transition. A few years ago, we did 4th to 5th. And we're looking for an overall positive experience as reported by parents and students for that transition to increase. We began collecting information late last week regarding this transition to address the KPI. Right now, preliminary responses from parents are showing that we're on track to match or increase there. And the student survey went out today, so hopefully we will have good news to report to you guys next week.
All right.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you. This would be an opportunity for the public to address the board. Seeing no community members here, we will move on to our action item. I seek a motion to approve the school maintenance grant application.
I move to approve the FY 2025 school maintenance project grant application.
May I have a second?
Second.
Motion having been made and seconded, will the clerk please call the roll?
John Cesaretti,
Yes.
Ann Hart,
Yes?
Bonnie Kim,
Yes.
Allison Pappas,
Yes.
Amy Paling,
Yes.
Aaron Stone.
Yes, the ayes have it, the motion carries. And we are now moving on to any old business. Is there any old business anyone wants to bring up? Okay, we're moving on to new business. We do have at least one item of new business. The first is the review of the intergovernmental agreement proposal with the Village of Wilmette. I believe I'm turning this over to Mr. DeMonte.
So from time to time, we review our agreements that we have with village partners, and it was time to review our reciprocal reporting agreement that we had with the Village of Wilmette, the police department. And I'd like to thank former Police Chief Murphy, current Police Chief Robinson, and then Jeff Stein, who is the Assistant Village Manager, as well as counsel for the village. And through those people, probably over the last 5 months or so, it was a slow process. We were able to go through and updating an intergovernmental agreement to reflect the new ways in which we partner with the police department. Many years ago, it may just have been an exchange of information, whereas now we do so much more, and rightfully so. So a few things to point out. The agreement clarifies and it really just makes clear when we can share information with the police department or vice versa. All the applicable privacy laws, confidentiality laws are called out within this agreement, both on our side and theirs. The agreement affirms our role in discipline, which I think is important, and it lies within the school code, student code of conduct, and police officials' role with the ordinance and any criminal matters. So if there was any concern by the public or by this board about where the line starts and where it ends, that's definitely called out in this. Body-worn cameras by police officers is a relatively new requirement. So we in Wilmette, as well as other communities, appreciate privacy and confidentiality for our students as well as our staff. So in here also includes the police department's protocol and language about when they are to activate them, if it's a call for service or a law enforcement encounter. It does also state that the SRO, Officer Davis position, for the majority of the time, that body-worn camera will be inactive unless one of those two items were to occur. We provide limited access in our security cameras. So this is a newer event where access is provided and clarifies when the cameras can be viewed, such as in an emergency call, if it's made from the district, or imminent and substantial threat to our students or buildings. Keys, our police department does have both proximity keys as well as physical keys to our properties, and that is provided for responding to emergencies. Training exercise that are pre-approved. So in summers, we've allowed them in our buildings to practice in our schools. They appreciate the use of space. We appreciate them practicing in our buildings. And also routine patrols. It may not be known, but sometimes in the dead of night, 2 a.m., we'll get a little motion sensor alert because our officers may choose to walk our buildings. That's a great thing because our schools are, they're learning our schools. Newer officers are being walked through our schools. They get the benefit of familiarity. We get the benefit of overnight patrols at times. So not a regular occurrence, not to be expected, but a positive as far as we see it. And this agreement is valid for 1 year and will be automatically renewed at 1 year periods unless terminated with 30-day notice. So this is something that we can just continue to use unless we feel it needs to be updated. In fact, so we can update that at any time, cancel it if we so chose. They could as well. So really today was an opportunity for you to just review it, ask any questions if you have it, with approval to happen on Monday at the board meeting. Are there any questions from our board? It's pretty straightforward and pretty clear. No? No? Okay.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
It sounds like a lot of thought went into this.
Actually, a lot of thought
Yeah.
went into this. There are ways in which we partner. Those needed to be memorialized in writing just for everyone's clarity and protection.
Yeah, thank you. Sure. Okay. Does anyone have any other new business? I have one item. I think congratulations are in order for our superintendent for graduating from the AASA National Superintendent Certification Program this past Friday, right?
Yes, that's
Yes.
right. Thank you very much.
So it's well done.
Thank you for your support and our administrative team's support.
All right. Anybody else? Anything new? Okay. Seeing no more, may I have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn the October 21st, 2024 special meeting in committee of the whole.
May I have a second?
Second.
Motion having been made and seconded, will the clerk please call the roll?
Ann Hart,
Yes.
Bonnie Kim,
Yes.
Allison Paplas,
Yes.
Amy Paling,
Yes.
John Ready,
Yes.
Aaron Stone.
Yes. Motion carries. We are now adjourned and the time is 9:24 a.m.